Florida's foundation is dissolving. Right now. Beneath luxury condos worth millions. Beneath theme parks hosting thousands. Beneath highways carrying hundreds of thousands daily. The ground is not solid. It never was. And the water rising from below is eating it faster than anyone predicted. Picture this. You own a beachfront home in Miami, paid $3 million. Wake up one morning to find cracks spiderwebbing across your walls. Your doors won't close. Your foundation inspector delivers the news that changes everything. Saltwater has been corroding your steel-reinforced concrete for years. Underground. Invisible. Unstoppable. Your insurance excludes it. Your home is worthless. This is not a future scenario. This is happening now. Over 426 miles of Florida's 825-mile coastline are critically eroded. That's more than half. The beaches that define Florida, that generate $186 billion in tourism annually, are vanishing at rates that defy every prediction made just 5 years ago. But here's what has scientists in complete panic. The erosion you can see is not the real threat. It's what's happening underground. Saltwater intrusion is accelerating 40% faster than 20th century records. The limestone bedrock holding up entire cities is dissolving from below. And the same geological nightmare that killed 98 people in the Surfside collapse could be spreading beneath thousands of coastal buildings right now. The evidence is undeniable. Rising seas, dissolving rock, corroding foundations, collapsing beaches, and a state built on paradise that's learning the ground was never permanent at all. January 11, 2026, near Inverness, Florida. Two 14-year-old boys, George Watts and Derek Hubbard, best friends since childhood, dig a tunnel in sugar sand at a sportsman's park. The fine white sand feels solid. It is not. Within minutes, the tunnel collapses. Both boys are buried. Parents arrive to find deputies frantically digging. By the time first responders extract them, it is too late. Both teens are transported to the hospital. Neither survives. Sugar sand. The same material that makes Florida beaches famous. The same material tourists photograph and children play in. Unstable. Deadly when disturbed. The incident sparks immediate warnings across the state. February 20th, 2024. Lauderdale by the Sea. 7-year-old Sloan Mattingly and her 9-year-old brother Maddox dig a hole on the beach. A family from Indiana enjoying Florida sunshine. The hole reaches 5 to 6 feet deep. Without warning, the sand collapses. Over a dozen bystanders jump in, digging frantically with their bare hands. Cell phone video captures the chaos. Maddox is rescued chest deep in sand. Sloan is not breathing when paramedics reach her. She dies at the hospital. The American Lifeguard Association releases a statement with visible urgency. This is a heart-wrenching reminder of why we must work together to keep our beaches safe. Sand collapse incidents are increasing. 52 reported cases nationwide of individuals, primarily children and young adults, falling victim to sand hole collapses. Most involve holes deeper than knee height. Most occur within minutes. Most end in tragedy. Dr. Stephen Leatherman, professor of coastal science at Florida International University, publishes research showing sand collapses happen more frequently than shark bites. The data is disturbing. Sand appears stable when wet due to surface tension. As it dries, structural integrity vanishes instantly. Weight compresses victims' chests. Airways close. Asphyxia happens in minutes. Rescuers often can't dig fast enough. First responders across Florida begin intensive training for sand collapse scenarios. New Jersey first aid teams post warnings during summer training exercises. Do not build tunnels under the sand. Being buried under sand results in asphyxiation and crush injuries, which quickly lead to suffocation and death. Teach your kids the danger of digging holes in the sand. Clearwater Beach lifeguard manager Patrick Brafford implements new enforcement protocols for spring break 2026. Everybody comes to the beach to enjoy the sand. Digging holes and making sand castles are part of that. But it can be taken to an extreme measure. If lifeguards say you can't dig too deep, understand we're doing it for safety. The seemingly innocent activity of childhood is revealing itself as a hidden danger few parents understood. But sand collapse is just the surface symptom. The real threat is what's happening beneath Florida's entire coast. The ground itself is fundamentally unstable, and it's getting worse. Dr. Szymon Wójtowski, Earth and Environment Professor at Florida International University, examines coastal geology data with growing alarm. Southeast Florida sits on porous limestone. Rainwater, slightly acidic, seeps through soil and dissolves the rock slowly over time. This process creates underground voids, caverns, and networks that honeycomb the subsurface. When voids become too large to support their ceilings, they collapse. Suddenly, without warning. Creating sinkholes, the numbers tell a disturbing story. Over 4,100 subsidence events recorded in Florida's official database as of early 2023. Experts confirm sinkholes are accelerating, particularly in Central Florida's Sinkhole Alley. This region includes Pasco, Hernando, and Hillsborough counties north of Tampa, the highest concentration of sinkholes in the state. Urban development, groundwater pumping, and unpredictable weather patterns trigger formations at unprecedented rates. Dr. Manoj Chopra at the University of Central Florida describes the geology with precision. Sinkhole Alley stretches from Hillsborough County near Tampa all the way to Daytona, passing through Maitland and Winter Park. The region sits atop carbonate rock, primarily limestone. When you fly over Central Florida and see perfectly round lakes, they're probably sinkholes. A sinkhole is typically a funnel that fails at the surface and collapses inward. Historic collapses reveal the scale of potential devastation. Winter Park, 1981. A massive 400-foot sinkhole swallows a house, 5 sports cars, 2 businesses, and part of a swimming pool. The void that formed is now Lake Rose, a permanent reminder of the instability beneath seemingly solid ground. Land O'Lakes, 2017. Another massive sinkhole destroys 2 homes and forces evacuations, making statewide headlines. Seffner, February 28, 2013, 11 p.m. Eastern Time. Jeffrey Bush, 36 years old, sleeps in his bedroom when a cover collapse sinkhole opens directly beneath his house. The hole measures 20 feet wide and at least 30 feet deep, possibly extending 50 to 60 feet underground. The house perches precariously over the void. Bush's brother hears the collapse, rushes to the room, jumps into the hole trying to save him. Rescue workers pull the brother out. They never recover Jeffrey Bush's body. The search is called off within 48 hours. Too dangerous. The house is demolished from outside the perimeter. Cover collapse sinkholes form suddenly, minutes to hours. Sediments continue slumping for days. Erosion of edges lasts even longer. Fortunately, these sudden collapses are rare. A recent assessment of 1,400 sinkholes finds only 1 or 2 cover collapse types. More common is slow, gradual subsidence forming bowl-shaped depressions over years. More than 500 reported in Hillsborough County since 1954. But when cover collapse sinkholes strike, they're catastrophic. Florida Geological Survey data confirms sinkholes are usually isolated events. However, certain conditions can trigger swarms. A hurricane following a drought. Multiple sinkholes opening within minutes to hours of each other. Tropical Storm Debbie. The January 2010 frost freeze event in Plant City. Entire neighborhoods suddenly vulnerable to cascading failures. The Villages, a massive retirement community in Central Florida, experiences sinkhole season with terrifying regularity. February and May bring waves of collapses. Calumet Grove suffers 7 sinkholes in February, then 4 more in May after persistent rain. 80-year-old Frank Newman watches his home damaged twice in 95 days. Prior to Monday's sinkhole activity, Newman hoped to repair his home and stay in the neighborhood he's lived in for 14 years. But as he stands in his front yard, looking at the second wave of destruction, he's not sure remaining in the Villages is a good idea. Geologist David Wilshaw responds to suspected sinkhole calls almost daily. Residents report prowlers that turn out to be dark voids. Couples find sinkholes literally on their doorsteps. An elderly couple in Ocala crawls from their car after a sinkhole in a fast food lot swallows their vehicle. A man simply standing in grass slips through a trapdoor into a 5-foot hole. In Apopka, half a couple's home collapses. Nearly 50 years of memories sink with it. A woman calls Wilshaw after discovering a small depression in her yard. It turns out to be a leaking irrigation line, not a sinkhole. But she hadn't slept the whole night, terrified the ground would swallow her. The psychological toll of living on dissolving rock. Knowing the earth beneath you is not solid, never was, never will be. Climate change is accelerating everything. Dr. George Vini, a leading karst geologist, predicts the future with disturbing clarity. As sea level rises in response to climate change, groundwater levels in near coastal areas will also rise and result in increased flooding of sinkholes. Studies on the potential degree of such flooding and its triggering new sinkhole collapses are just beginning. Vini is conducting preliminary research in Florida right now. But sinkholes are just one component of Florida's geological nightmare. The real catastrophe is happening where land meets sea, where salt water rises from below, where foundations built for paradise are corroding in silence. June 24, 2021, 1:30 a.m. Surfside, Florida. Champlain Towers South, a 12-story residential building on a barrier island north of Miami Beach, collapses without warning. Residents sleep. Families dream. In seconds, 98 people die. The building pancakes into rubble. Rescue workers search for weeks. The nation watches in horror. Federal investigators with the National Institute of Standards and Technology spend years analyzing the disaster. Construction flaws. Extensive above-ground corrosion. Residents had complained the foundation shook during construction of a tower next door. An environmental scientist documented that the building had slowly sunk in the 1990s. But preliminary findings released in late 2025 reveal something more insidious. The construction of the pool deck deviated from design requirements. The foundation was compromised, and saltwater had been attacking from below for decades. Dr. Szymon Wodowinski publishes the first peer-reviewed study on rising sea levels underground attack on residential buildings in November before the collapse. The research, later reported by the Palm Beach Post, uses data from nearby monitoring wells. The findings are chilling. The number of times groundwater rose above the level of Champlain Towers South's garage floor increased from an average of 244 times per year from 1994 to 2006 to 636 times per year from 2007 to 2020. Wodowinski hypothesizes that during natural tidal cycles, particularly during extremely high king tides, underground seawater and the freshwater layer above it probably mixed. The frequency of mixing increases as sea levels continue to rise. Saltwater corrodes steel. Steel reinforces concrete. When steel corrodes, concrete fails. Foundations crumble. Buildings collapse. Dr. Randall Parkinson, another researcher investigating the connection, examines the data with visible concern. I really feel like this was completely missed. You can see coastal erosion. You can see if you are losing your shoreline or if your property gets flooded, but you cannot see what is happening underground. The invisible threat, the silent killer. Saltwater intrusion destroying foundations that appear perfectly sound from the surface. Fred Bloucher, civil engineer at Florida Atlantic University, studies how sea level rise affects municipal water systems. After the Surfside collapse, he calls Anthony Abate, an architect focused on protecting buildings from climate change. They had discussed the possibility that steel-reinforced concrete in building foundations could fail from deterioration caused by rising levels of salty groundwater. Do you think this could be a factor? Bloucher asks. I do not know, but it sure looks like it, Abate replies. In mid-December 2021, Bloucher, Abate, and colleague Khaled Soban submit a study. The title captures the terrifying question facing Florida's coast. Can sea level rise and accompanying saltwater intrusion contribute to catastrophic building failures? The research suggests thousands of coastal buildings could be vulnerable to the same decay that potentially contributed to Champlain Towers South's collapse. Even if saltwater intrusion wasn't the primary cause of the Surfside collapse, experts agree on one thing. This unseen and overlooked threat could make many other residential towers on the Florida coast vulnerable to decay. The mechanism is simple, devastating, and accelerating. Sea levels rise. Groundwater levels rise with them. Saltwater mixes with freshwater in the subsurface. The mixture reaches building foundations. Saltwater corrodes steel reinforcement. Concrete degrades. Foundations weaken. Structures that stood for decades suddenly face catastrophic failure. And the process is invisible until it is too late. The constant slowing down of the Gulf Stream is a major factor in Florida's sea level rise. Climate scientists detect warning signs of the collapse of Gulf Stream currents, which are already at their slowest in at least 1,600 years. As currents slow, water piles up along Florida's coast. Sea level rise accelerates beyond global averages. The threat compounds. Scientists estimate healthy coral reefs can reduce 97% of a wave's energy before it hits shore. Just 100 meters of mangrove trees can reduce wave height by 66%. A recent study finds mangroves in Florida protected approximately 625,000 people and prevented $1.5 billion in direct flood damages during Hurricane Irma in 2017. But these natural barriers are being overwhelmed. The loss of natural beach affects the stability of building foundations and how ecosystems rebound between storms and seasons. Researchers are trying to sound the alarm, but the threat remains largely invisible. Homeowners see beaches, tourists see paradise, developers see prime real estate. No one sees the saltwater rising through limestone. No one sees steel corroding in foundations. No one sees the catastrophic failures waiting to happen. Maria Santos stands in her kitchen in Fort Lauderdale. The home cost $1.8 million 3 years ago. Beachfront property, ocean views, paradise. Then the cracks appear, first in the garage, then spreading up walls. Doors that always close smoothly suddenly stick. Windows don't open properly. She calls a foundation inspector. The inspector arrives with equipment. Measures, tests, analyzes. The news is devastating. Saltwater intrusion has compromised your foundation. The steel reinforcement shows significant corrosion. Repairs will cost hundreds of thousands, maybe more. And there's no guarantee repairs will hold. The saltwater keeps rising. Maria checks her insurance policy. Ground subsidence, saltwater damage, foundation failure, all excluded. The home she believed was her retirement security is now a liability. She can't sell it without disclosure. She can't afford to fix it. She can't afford to lose it. She's trapped, and she's not alone. Across coastal Florida, similar stories multiply. Homeowners discovering their foundations are compromised. Insurance companies denying claims based on policy exclusions buried in fine print. Property values plummeting as word spreads. Banks refusing to write mortgages on vulnerable properties. The economic cascade is beginning. Citizens Property Insurance, Florida's state-backed insurer of last resort, faces mounting pressure. The company was created to insure properties private companies won't touch. But even Citizens begins canceling policies in high-risk coastal areas. Ground collapse exclusions, saltwater damage exclusions, foundation failure exclusions. Homeowners are left with properties they can't insure, can't sell, can't abandon. Florida Senate Bill 408 changes insurance regulations in response to increasing sinkhole and foundation claims. Coverage becomes more restricted. Deductives increase. Homeowners must purchase separate endorsements for sinkhole coverage. Standard policies cover catastrophic ground cover collapse only. Slow-moving subsidence, gradual foundation failure, saltwater corrosion, all require additional expensive coverage that many can't afford or don't know exists until they need it. The real estate market begins showing strain. Coastal properties in Southeast Florida see sales drop 23% year over year. Buyers demand extensive geological surveys before closing. Lenders require proof of foundation integrity. Properties near documented sinkhole zones become nearly impossible to sell. $67 billion in assessed coastal property value faces uncertainty. Construction permits for new coastal high-rises face unprecedented scrutiny. Engineers must prove foundations can withstand saltwater intrusion. Building codes undergo emergency review. Retrofit requirements for existing structures loom. The cost of coastal development explodes. The era of cheap beachfront construction is ending. Tourism shows signs of stress. Spring break bookings for 2026 are down 11% in some coastal counties. Negative publicity about beach erosion, sinkholes, and building safety concerns spreads on social media. International visitors begin choosing other destinations. The economic engine that drives Florida sputters. But government response remains fragmented and inadequate. Governor Ron DeSantis allocates emergency funding for beach renourishment, $89 million to pump sand onto eroding beaches. But scientists warn this is temporary at best. The sand will wash away again. The erosion continues. The limestone keeps dissolving. The problem is geological, not cosmetic. Miami-Dade County implements new building inspection protocols for coastal structures over 30 years old. Mandatory foundation assessments, structural integrity certifications, saltwater corrosion testing. Building owners face massive inspection costs. Many older buildings fail initial assessments. Repair costs reach into millions per building. Some owners simply abandon properties. Federal assistance requests go nowhere. FEMA's mandate covers disasters, not slow-moving geological failures. Congress debates whether climate-related coastal deterioration qualifies for emergency funding. The debate continues while buildings corrode and beaches vanish. The coastline data tells a story Florida doesn't want to hear. 426.6 miles of the state's 825-mile coastline are critically eroded. That's 51.7%, more than half. And the erosion is accelerating at unprecedented rates. Once you could re-nourish a Florida beach and not need to do it again for a decade. Not anymore. Beaches require constant, expensive maintenance. Sand pumped onto shores washes away in months, sometimes weeks. The cost is unsustainable. The results are temporary. The erosion is permanent. The Florida Panhandle shows the worst erosion rates. Average erosional rate of negative 0.9 meters per year. Erosion occurs at 61% of measured transect locations, making this the most erosional subregion in the state long-term. Beaches that were 100 feet wide 20 years ago are 20 feet wide now. Some are gone completely. Southeast Florida faces different but equally severe challenges. While erosion rates are slower, population density is vastly higher. Miami-Dade, Broward, and Palm Beach counties contain over 6 million residents. Property values exceed $500 billion. Critical infrastructure serves the entire state, and all of it sits on dissolving limestone with rising saltwater attacking from below. The limestone platform extends beyond Florida. Georgia sits on identical porous limestone. South Carolina contains karsted topography riddled with underground voids. North Carolina's Outer Banks show early warning signs scientists previously dismissed as normal erosion. The Atlantic coastal plain stretches 1,200 miles from Florida to New Jersey, all potentially vulnerable. Georgia Department of Natural Resources deploys emergency survey teams to barrier islands. Jekyll Island reports minor subsidence in 3 locations. Tybee Island experiences unexplained beach erosion, accelerating beyond historical rates. South Carolina requests federal geological assessment. The threat expands northward. International attention focuses on Florida as a global warning. The Bahamas sits on identical limestone formations. Caribbean islands face similar vulnerabilities. Mexico's Yucatan Peninsula contains the world's largest underwater cave systems. Mediterranean coastlines monitor developments closely. What's happening to Florida could happen anywhere limestone coasts meet rising seas. Economic projections become increasingly dire. Atlantic coast tourism generates $186 billion annually across affected states. Real estate values in 15 coastal counties total $2.4 trillion in assessed property. Federal Reserve economists analyze scenarios where spreading coastal deterioration could trigger an economic catastrophe. Lloyd's of London, the international insurance giant, reclassifies the entire Atlantic limestone coast as extreme risk. The designation makes traditional insurance coverage prohibitively expensive or completely unavailable. Property owners face the prospect of uninsurable assets. Banks reconsider mortgage lending in affected areas. The entire coastal property market faces potential collapse. 3 nuclear power plants operate in zones now classified as vulnerable to geological instability. Military installations supporting Atlantic Fleet operations rest on foundations that may be compromised. The Port of Savannah, America's 3rd busiest, was built on rock that dissolves. Critical infrastructure faces existential questions about long-term viability. Climate scientists warn this may represent acceleration beyond worst-case projections. The stressors converging on Florida's coast are not temporary conditions but permanent features of a changing world. Sea level rise continues. Saltwater intrusion accelerates. Limestone dissolution compounds. The feedback loops intensify. Dr. Wodowinski and colleagues publish updated research. In areas with more human activity, we interfere with the subsurface more. Groundwater pumping, construction, development, all accelerate the natural processes that create sinkholes and compromise foundations. Florida's development boom of the past 50 years has fundamentally altered the geological balance. The bill is coming due. February 2026. Florida's coast faces a crisis that has no clear solution. Unlike hurricanes, which pass and leave damage that can be repaired, this is ongoing geological failure with no endpoint. Engineers cannot rebuild on ground that continues to dissolve. Insurance cannot cover losses that policies specifically exclude. Government cannot fund relief for problems that exceed all emergency reserves. The limestone foundation that seemed eternal reveals its terrifying fragility. Centuries of stability created false confidence in ground that was slowly dissolving all along. The acceleration defies conventional understanding. The stressors are not temporary, they are permanent, and they are compounding. Community resilience emerges as the most powerful response. Neighbors helping neighbors. Churches opening doors to displaced families. Volunteers coordinating relief efforts overwhelmed government agencies cannot provide. The human capacity to respond to crisis offers hope. But individual generosity cannot address systemic geological collapse. Recovery efforts focus on mitigation rather than solution. Beach renourishment continues despite its temporary nature. Building codes strengthen. Inspection requirements increase. Research funding expands. But these are adaptations to inevitable decline, not fixes for the underlying problem. Property owners face impossible choices. Invest hundreds of thousands in foundation repairs that may only delay inevitable failure. Sell at massive losses while disclosure is still possible. Walk away from properties that consumed life savings. Stay and hope the ground holds long enough. There are no good options. The psychological toll spreads across coastal communities. Residents wake wondering if their homes will be there tomorrow. Property owners check for cracks obsessively. Parents warn children about digging in sand that used to symbolize innocence. The ground that seemed so solid has become a source of anxiety and dread. Scientists continue analyzing data that rewrites understanding of geological stability. Research teams from major universities collaborate on studies examining the full scope of Florida's coastal vulnerability. Emergency grants total hundreds of millions. But research cannot stop limestone from dissolving. It can only document the process and attempt to predict what happens next. Political leaders face questions they cannot answer. How many buildings are at risk? How far will erosion spread? Can coastal communities be saved? Should they be saved? What is the long-term plan for a state whose foundation is literally dissolving? The debates continue. The limestone keeps eroding. The ground keeps sinking. The water keeps rising. The questions raised by Florida's crumbling coast remain unanswered. How many more buildings will develop foundation problems before comprehensive inspections are mandated? How far north will the geological instability spread? Can communities adapt to living on ground that is not permanent? Will the insurance industry survive claims that exceed all projections? Can Florida remain a desirable place to live when the ground itself is uncertain? The beaches that defined Florida for generations keep shrinking. The limestone that supported paradise keeps dissolving. The foundations that held up million-dollar dreams keep corroding. And the state that built itself on the promise of eternal sunshine discovers the ground beneath it was never eternal at all. The threat continues. Scientists monitor, engineers assess, politicians debate, families worry. But beneath the surface, invisible to everyone, the saltwater rises. The limestone dissolves. The foundations weaken. And Florida learns the hardest lesson. Paradise was always built on sand, and sand shifts, always has, always will. The ground you stand on is not permanent. It never was, and it may not hold much longer.